Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tuesdays with Trailblazers, the podcast where we dive deep into the minds of industry leaders shaping the future of technology. I'm your host, Sid Shetty, and today we have something special. Our first ever episode with not one, but two expert guests from Trend Micro. Joining us today are two distinguished experts, Mick McCluney, the ANZ Field CTO, and Andrew Philp, the ANZ Field CSO. Mick brings extensive experience in cybersecurity, focusing on proactive threat detection and mitigation strategies, whereas Andrew, with over 20 years in information technology and a primary focus on cybersecurity, has been instrumental in assisting large enterprises and government agencies to review, maintain, and optimize their cybersecurity posture. Together, we'll be exploring some of the most pressing challenges in AI-driven cybersecurity, from protecting against malicious LLMs to defending against hyper-personalized cyber attacks and AI-generated disinformation. So without any further ado, let's welcome Mick and Andrew. Hey Mick, hey Andrew, how are you doing today?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having us, Sid.
Really good. Thanks for having us.
Likewise, guys. So before we actually begin, I'd love for you guys to introduce, we've done the introduction on our part, but I'd love for you guys to take over and, introduce yourselves. Probably, any bites we get from you, would love to have those.
Yeah, so I'm Mick McCluney. I'm the Field CTO for Trend Micro across Australia and New Zealand. What that means in practice is I'm responsible for the technical stack and services in Australia and New Zealand and all the things that we do as part of our cybersecurity platform and cyber management capabilities.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction as well earlier. So I've been just over a decade at Trend and like you said, spent my whole career in IT and specialising in cyber. And I think for me, I find cyber a very exciting area. It's very complex. There's lots of misinformation and there's lots of fear and uncertainty and doubt. So I feel that my role is to be able to take a little bit more of a practical approach and talk to leaders across the region, explain to them what our strategy is and how we're addressing some of these challenges. But ultimately, how do you go forward in business and the organisation that you're in? And how do you do that successfully and confidently? And how can you partner to achieve that? So yeah, I love the topic that you have today, Sid, and excited to talk.
Absolutely. I don't want to make you guys sound old, but that's a very distinguished career you guys have, spanning across 20 years or probably 2 decades for each of you. But moving on to the first question, guys, I actually want to understand, what measures can organizations implement to prevent personal information from being used to train malicious LLMs and create digital twins?
Yeah, thank you. So let me start with the high level approach, and then Mick will be able to jump a little bit into a technological layer, and hopefully the audience will be able to benefit from both sides. So I think just to level set a little bit, AI has been a topic that's obviously, been around for quite some time. What we like to explain is, artificial intelligence is a broader topic that has really just meant that machines have been able to take human tasks, and that's been happening for decades actually. And we've sort of gone through these iterations of machine learning where it becomes a little bit more automated. And obviously a big change that you referred to as LLM or large language models. Now, the reason that that's been such a pivotal change is suddenly those machines that can do human tasks can communicate like humans, and suddenly they can start to create audio and video, and they can look like us and talk like us. So it becomes a big issue for individuals and a big issue for businesses around what does that mean for their own identity. So the challenge is large, and we've seen a lot of examples, and I'm sure your audience and yourself have seen that, where, what we call deepfakes. So this digital twin is another way of looking at it. Something that's been trained to look like a person has been able to impersonate that person and trick someone into, transferring money in whichever way that they do. So it is a big challenge. And I guess there's lots of different things that you can do. So I'll talk about it from a people and process perspective, and then Mick will talk about it from a technology perspective. So from a people and process perspective, the main thing is to understand, and for executives particularly, to understand that this is out there. So if they know that whatever they put on their social media can be used to train these models, and if they know that the person talking to them may be trained from someone else's public information, then they can start to think about verifying. So making sure that they have a way of trusting. One of the advices that I've given a lot of people, and it's been well received, is to have a safe word. So if you're concerned about one of your executives giving you, not being the person that they are, just have a really old-fashioned word that you never write down, that you both know, and then you can always verify. And that works really well for families as well. If they're concerned that their kids might actually be an AI model impersonating them when they're away on leave. So, and that's the sort of from a people perspective, from a process perspective, making sure that you have the right things in place, that you're not going to be transferring money without the right checks, and that the people in your organization are enabled to actually question that. They're not scared to say, are you really who you are? Prove to me that I should be doing this. And that's a real cultural change. But luckily, it's not just people and process. Organizations like ourselves, Trend Micro, have been spending a long time investing in this. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what we're doing from a technological perspective to help with that.
Sure. So the technology aspect of this is quite interesting. We've been at this for years. Trend Micro have been using AI in many forms for about 20 years. The latest evolution in terms of digital twin has just become the latest way in which a sort of an attack might culminate. We have deepfake detection software that looks for, it basically analyzes a video stream, say of you, Sid, and looks for spatial anomalies in the way that image is put together. But I would say on the attacker side of this, certainly I do a talk where we've already generated video and audio off social media of one of my colleagues to speak and act like them in a video call. And we've seen evidence of this. There was a Hong Kong-based arm of a British engineering firm that got taken for $25 million in a video call where one or more participants seemed to be fake participants. So I think you have to bear in mind that people and process bit. And if you can have some technology to back that up and just detect that it's fake immediately, let's have that in place too. And I think amongst all of those things, we can bring up a good solid defense to these types of innovative attacks.
Great. I mean, that's great to know, Mick. Specifically, I guess you relaying that incident, I'm pretty sure, highlighting that aspect. So it's great to know about these things. Now, coming to business identity, how can business identity and mitigating the risk of hyper-personalized business email compromise and fake employee scams?
I guess it's not dissimilar to what we're talking about when we talk about digital twins. So, for a long time, people have been, trying to trick people in one way or another, which is, I guess, is the broader term for BEC or business email compromise. With the advent of AI, and as we alluded to before, and as you alluded to, training these models, it gets harder to detect. So there's a couple of different ways. So Mick's going to talk a little bit about how we continue. It's a bit like a kind of an adversarial AI, right? They're doing their bit, we're doing our bit, we're fighting against each other. So he'll talk a little bit about that. But what Mick will also talk about is, there's a concept called zero trust. Zero trust as in cybersecurity is very important. It's something people have been working towards for quite some time. And that's where we kind of have to take this approach where at some point something is going to get through. So if that gets through, what do we do to automate a response, to use that AI that's defending us and to be able to protect the organization? So Mick will talk about those two areas.
Sid, let me dive into those for you a bit. So you've got phishing emails aren't new, as we know, right? Yeah. They've just become more convincing. And I think what happens now with the use of AI is it used to be that if I want to target Sid at Sid's business, I'd have to go out and do that research myself. I'd work out what conferences you were going to. Perhaps I could send you a link to some photos from that conference so you'd click, right? Now AI can go and do that at mass scale for me. So I could target 100, 1,000, maybe even many thousands of people in the same way, using the same sort of coding capability. You're sending very convincing phishing emails to a number of people. So I think what we're alluding to in that is that someone's going to click, right? You can train people to be suspicious, and so we should, but somebody will click. From that point on, it's all about visibility. So you've executed whatever bit of code that is, or whatever link that is in your environment. Now we're at the point of understanding all the visibility of the signals of whether something's gone wrong or not. And I think that's about having the right sort of platform and correlation across identity, obviously the email coming in, something happening after that. Maybe you're reaching out to the web on some unsafe IP addresses, or maybe the execution of some unsafe code. And all these things together might be low-level signals, but you pull them together, it's a high-level signal. So that's one thing. The second thing is, and this is not just with this kind of attack, but also these very prevalent identity attacks we're seeing in the same way here, where people come in via a phishing link, and then you have to kind of understand whether they're suspicious or not. And zero trust as a philosophy implemented and backed up by some technology that sort of says, well, I know who Sid is, I know what his device is, I know what applications he should be using. So any events outside of the normal there, I can treat as abnormal. I can apply some artificial intelligence to understanding that abnormal and then implement some lockdown rules around that or some challenge rules. So a rule that challenges Sid to go and re-authenticate or change his password because you have clicked. And I think it's going to be a mixture of these things, to be honest. It's going to be really, really tight email defense with AI backing to understand these phishing links. But in the case where they get clicked, then you've got to have the really tight correlated intelligence across your IT ecosystem that will allow you to determine whether there's something anomalous happening. Both of those together, actually using AI against the attackers, will a significant defense factor against this kind of attack.
I said it's kind of an anti-venom in that case, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an anti-venom, absolutely. Using exactly what they're using to attack us in a kind of reverse way.
Makes sense. Absolutely. Kind of personally relate to it, Mick and Andrew, to be honest. I've fallen into this trap. Not me personally, but, people reporting under me actually got emails stating, I was stuck in a situation where I was trying to get out and, there was a link to it asking for payments. And apparently one of them actually did fall into the trap, sending some money out there. Thankfully, it wasn't a big amount, but at the same time, it was a small amount. And, at the end of the day, it's loss is a loss. So yeah, these kind of phishing scams do happen. These kind of, scams do happen. And I'm pretty, as I said, now, I kind of personally relate to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Humans have been scamming each other for thousands of years, Sid. We just found a new way in which to do it with kind of non-humans, which is a bit scary. But in itself, it's going to build mistrust amongst our users and our people. So I think that's the key thing of just having that sense of nuanced mistrust, both at a human level and at a machine and technology level.
Absolutely. And as you rightly said, with the advent of AI, it's kind of tripled or quadrupled these kind of incidents. And the perfect antidote is to build a defense system which is kind of developed with AI itself. So yeah, makes perfect sense in that case. Now, coming back to business collaborations, how can businesses collaborate with social media platforms? Because it's kind of everywhere right now. So how do businesses collaborate with social media platforms to identify and remove AI-generated personas spreading disinformation?
Yeah, it's a good question, Sid, because it's a really challenging area. Just like the story that you shared, and it's really important to share these stories and not feel like we should be shamed to share them, because as we share these stories and we understand where things have been impacting, then other people won't fall for it, which is really important, right? So sharing is really important. And we would like to do that same thing. And you see a lot of news articles, particularly about, social media being infiltrated with these attackers or scammers or people that are, perpetrating sextortion events and all sorts of things in that space. The stark reality is it's very difficult for an individual or for a business to be able to collaborate with these very large platforms to be able to fix some of these things. A lot of these platforms kind of rely on, the freedom of that information exchange and those algorithms for their own business model. So it's very difficult. It's a much bigger problem trying to solve some of that. So I guess in our space, we've done a lot of work in that space researching. Every time we will find a campaign that's been tied back or spread. There was an example of a campaign that was actually just using Facebook ads to be able to spread and then convincing people to download what appeared to be an AI model that they would run, and of course it would cause all sorts of damage. We will then feed back that information to the social media companies. We'll then, work with them and law enforcement to make sure that it gets taken down. So we're sort of doing our bit to aid as much as possible. And I think it's really important, whether you're an individual or whether you're an organization, to partner with a security company that has that sort of research and breadth. And then, that can be the arm, I guess, that goes back and helps to fight that ever-evolving fight within social media.
Yeah, I think that detection of, as a business, you've got to be aware of people faking up your business. That's naturally not new, right? People doing fake websites, people doing fake login sites for your business, or just faking up what you do so that they can get the customers. I think you've got to be extra vigilant around that. And when people start generating AI twins of you personally, that's when you need to, I think this is where AI regulation will come into place. There's just been a large conference around that in Paris around how we regulate AI. Hopefully some of that will bring in some regulations for the consumer on the street, but being aware and being the squeaky wheel. I suppose the other thing is limiting the amount of, I'd say, personal content is out there completely open to the public. I know we like to share with our friends and our family, but locking down those social profiles a little bit so that you're not, I mean, obviously if you're a social personality on the web, then you need to, that's going to be public, and this will be public too. Mm-hmm. But from a personal sense, you may want to limit access to those elements of your personal life, shall we say.
Absolutely. And I believe ethical use of AI is kind of propping up everywhere. So you guys believe that specifically in this aspect, it kind of is very important that ethical use of AI should be a mandate?
Yeah, personally, absolutely. I think the problem is drawing up regulations and governance at a global level. You know, it's something we've struggled with the internet for a long time, is how do you govern it across what we call national borders? I think the EU and the UK have made some good steps so far already in this area in terms of determining what ethical use of AI is. It's a much broader subject because, you know, AI being used to do very evil things or difficult things is something that I think we're going to struggle with. Andrew, what do you think?
It's almost like Pandora's box asking that question. And I hope we've got 3 or 4 hours for the audience to try and give it the 30-second version. Yeah, I mean, I agree. AI is a game changer, and if we don't have some sort of ethics and guidelines around that, then it's going to be a big challenge. There are a couple of sort of examples that you can get. So if you look at GDPR in Europe, General Data Protection Regulation, when that came into effect, more than 5 years ago, and that was a statement about protecting the privacy of the data that European citizens had. Far more strict than what we would see here in Australia and I'm sure in many other countries. So there are precedents to turn around and say large organisations, if they put in rules around AI, making sure that it's not going to disadvantage citizens. And I think that you'll see a lot of advancement in that space out of, these conferences that are happening. However, if you look at the dark side of the world, the cyber criminals, enforcing any rules around that stuff is virtually impossible. So if you think about a scammer that sets up a whole bunch of, fake domains, they can still take a long time to remove those domains because of the way that, like Mick alluded to, the way that different law enforcement works and those sorts of things. So we're always going to, unfortunately, have a little bit of a fight when it comes to cyber criminals. But from a legislation perspective, we can hope that different governments will come and protect our citizens as far as how big organizations use AI.
Absolutely. Love the word hope out there. I mean, don't want to make it sound dramatical, but wherever there's darkness, there's always a ray of light. So we always live by that. Perfect. So now coming back to the best practices, Andrew and Mick. So what are the best practices for harnessing AI, to improve threat intelligence, attack path prediction, and remediation guidance?
I think that it's something that's evolved. And it's a dream, I guess, that a lot of security vendors that have been around for some time have wanted to be able to put a lot of this automation in place. But it's taken, there's 2 big parts to that recipe that are needed for success. One is this natural language processing, Gen AI, the ability for those models to interact in a better way. That technology advancement and, of course, all of the hardware and services that allow that underneath has been really important. But the second part that doesn't get talked about as much is having the breadth of the connections into the environment to be able to utilize that. And so we call it platform. And when those 2 things come together, that's why Mick gets so excited about answering these sorts of questions.
Great. Love to hear what your thoughts are, Mick.
What we have put together over, if you look at our cybersecurity history as a company, right? To an extent, until recently, we've always been looking in the rearview mirror, right? We've always been saying, hey, this happened. What should we do next? And we've reached a turning point, Sid, here. In our technology has come together in terms of understanding your IT ecosystem, how your assets are related, what roles and paths connect them, what the risk elements and the attack surfaces of those things are. So you imagine that deep understanding of your IT infrastructure, and then you marry it with the telemetry you're getting from what's going on, and you can predict now what the attack's going to be, and you can see that attack going to happen. You see, there's no attack that just happens as just one thing. It's always a series of little connected things. And as soon as we see those connections happening, we can start to predict these threat attacks. And that's the really exciting thing about AI, because it's connecting these events together. It's correlating the information. These are large data sets, which hitherto have been difficult to understand in this way. But AI allows you to connect the dots, a neurally network between those events to predict these attack paths and get to a point where we're actually looking ahead of ourselves in the road. And that's essentially it. And that's why it's so exciting. It's a turning point in the cybersecurity industry to understand what's coming.
Makes perfect sense, Mick. Now, for a change, the next question, I'll let Mick answer that first one first. So, Mick, how can companies gain end-to-end visibility into their AI agents and implement attack path prediction to mitigate cloud-based threats?
Yeah, okay. So what you need to do in this case is have a platform approach, which most companies should have, but you need something defending all elements of your IT ecosystem. So if you think about identity and email and endpoints and your assets and applications running in the cloud and your typical IT build for any company, and that includes the OT side, right? You need to understand, you need to get visibility across all of those elements. You need to feed that visibility in. And when I say visibility, that's like having the cameras and the alarm bells and the locks on your house feeding into the central system, right? And once you've got that all coming into the central system, you can relate these assets together and you can harness AI at the back end to actually understand what's going on in the environment and use that to see how you'll be attacked. And I feel like kind of this is where attack path prediction really comes into play. And if you look at the way cloud in particular has grown as a part of everybody's IT platform and how those assets are related, getting that telemetry in from cloud, which has typically been its own silo, and understanding how that plugs together is fundamental to this struggle. So that integrates all of those elements together and allows you to then automate your response to things happening in that environment. So what they call AI or agentic AI capabilities to not only understand the situation and interpret it, but also take action.
What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so the only thing I would add, I mean, that was a great explanation from Mick as well, specifically around AI. There's a perception in my mind from talking to lots of people that AI almost operates like a mythical thing in isolation. But, AI has so many other dependencies as part of that. So, we actually have a blueprint that we release out to help people understand this. But if you look at your own AI model that you might deploy, there's 6 different areas that you have to look at as far as how to secure that, from the users through to perhaps containers or microservices that the model might run on, the databases and data stores that it accesses. There might be some specific, native cloud AI services that it's using. So when we actually look at all of those different pieces, they all require the right level of control and visibility and protection to make that AI safe and to enable the organization to have that innovation that it gives you, but in a really clear way and a trustworthy way. So it's just about peeling it back and understanding those different layers, not being scared by them, but making sure that, that's why platformization has been so important. Because if you have a platform that can cover all of those different areas, it means that you can be safe in that space.
That's kind of insightful. Now, the next question is kind of interesting. So, what are the strategies organizations can adopt to harden LLM sandboxes, enforce strict data validation, and defend against prompt injection attacks?
Did you want to take that one, Mick? Or
going back to Andrew's previous answer, you'll find that an AI service is actually quite a complicated architecture of things. You can see the way NVIDIA is building out not only its chip base, but its services on top of that. So the software services that give you these large language models, but also the ability of that AI service to do many different things. And part of your growing attack surface, and you imagine, Sid, right? Everybody's looking at AI and how to use it. And that might be in a public sense, or it might be in a private sense. And some of the bigger companies are thinking, well, I don't want my data out there. I'm going to build my own LLMs. So I think part of what Andrew was talking about in the previous answer was when you build that LLM and you build your AI service in-house, you've built another attack surface. And that's an attack surface from a user point of view, right? Who's using your LLM service? What are they prompting it to do? Are they putting in things that they shouldn't? Or are they prompting it to do things that it shouldn't? Or are they getting data out of it that they shouldn't have? And one of the primary concerns, I guess, actually, when you speak to CIOs is with LLM technology and AI technology in general, is they're scared that data is going to leak, right? So I think rigorous understanding of what users can use, what AI services, what they're prompting that AI service to do and what they're receiving back, and kind of having eyes on that is partly around this strict data validation, but also it's around the strict capability of how the AI is being used. And I think that's talking to prompt injection attacks. And you'll notice that ChatGPT and all the others all have the capability to parse what's being asked. And if you ask it to do something illegal, it goes, no, I won't. Now you can frame your question in a different way so that you can get an answer out that you want. So that's where the prompt injection and the guardrails for AI come into place. So I think as companies think about how they're going to use AI, they need a policy of what they're going to allow their users and employees to do. Then they're going to have guardrails. Then they're going to need technical ways of implementing those policies and guardrails. And that's where we come in, because we provide those capabilities to understand user, LLM, AI, prompts, what's being engineered, what's being sent in, what's being put out. And we provide a number of security capabilities across that whole AI infrastructure. So when you're building large language models internally, there are a number of ways in which you can do that securely, and we can provide advice on that. So that's some of the technical back end stuff. No, I think strategically you need to think about that now as part of your cyber risk management capabilities. That's my bit. Andrew, what about you? You've probably got a lighter take that's less deep.
I guess Mick's well covered it pretty much, but love to know your thoughts and if there are any additions to it.
Yeah, I mean, won't repeat anything that Mick said. The only thing I will just reinforce is data. So when we think about this, a lot of it comes down to data. So whether it's that confidential data of a company, whether it's personally identifiable information that doesn't want to get leaked, or whether it's actually the result of that query. So trusting that and making sure that it's not hallucinating and doing those things. So I think if an organization and all of those different components, make sure that they focus on that data in and data out and has a way to validate that. So part of that is the tool set that Mick has, and part of that is making sure that the processes and what you're expecting out of it mature to meet that. Then that means that they can be really safe and they can trust what the AI is doing in that space.
Perfectly rounded that. I guess this is one segment I actually like, or a question I usually ask, everyone who comes in the podcast. We kind of put the crystal ball out of the box and ask folks in terms of what their predictions would look like in terms of trends. So for you guys, it will be probably about what it would look like in probably a decade later in terms of cybersecurity and threat intelligence. What do you think is in store for the future?
Shorter term, and Mick alluded to it, agentic AI is probably the thing that's going to be moving the most. Agentic AI is just a term that is basically once the models have learned and once the models have understood the variables that they can start to take monitored or unmonitored action to help in that space. So it's the autonomous part of AI. So from a cybersecurity perspective, that's what everyone wants. Everyone's been asking for a while, but it's actually something that does take some time to get stable and to be safe and be something. So in the short term, that's probably one of the biggest moving areas that we will see happening in the next couple of years. 10 years out, the mind boggles as to what can be impacted in AI. And I think, you could go off and think of some sort of futuristic show. Do we even have security professionals anymore, or have they been completely replaced by agentic AI? There's all sorts of scary kind of scenarios about what the world may look like if AI starts to become a little bit more autonomous. I mean, I think the reality, Mick said quite well before, people have been scamming people for thousands of years. It just changes. We're still humans. There's still human interaction. There's still business that has to happen. So I think, in the end, it'll be AI will find its place. It'll find, like we have had other revolutions, it'll find its space where it really maximizes efficiency. And then, people will always just interact with that and, continue to find those niches that they need to continue that. Maybe in a decade's time, it will be AI Sid and AI Mick and AI Andrew they should be sitting on a beach having a pina colada. Who knows? But I mean, that's sort of, I think that's a little way out, to be honest.
We'll be working and the AI agent will be sitting on a beach and
Well, I have a challenge for you, Mick, actually. I mean, I know you can go on and about this particular topic. Can you probably sum this up in 30 seconds? That's like a challenge for you.
Yeah. My second take is my hope is that the AI bit of this, I mentioned becoming suspicious, becomes suspicious for the good, right? And helps us sort out the good from the bad and helps us stay safe. That's my second take. And I think it can do it. So that's
That is
that's the
less
bit.
than 15 seconds. That's a new record. So that pretty much wraps up this episode of Tuesdays with Trailblazers. Thank you so much, Andrew and Mick. A huge thank you to Mick McCluney and Andrew Philp for sharing their insights on the evolving AI threat landscape and what businesses can do to stay secure. If you found this discussion valuable, be sure to subscribe and share it with your network. You can also follow us for more insights on the latest in technology and cybersecurity. Until next time, stay ahead, stay secure, and keep trailblazing.